Hey everyone, welcome back to the Toll Tribe channel. If you're new here, I should probably say welcome to the Toll Tribe channel. Thanks for stopping by. Today's video is actually pretty highly requested and has been for quite some time, and I've always meant to make this video, but it just has never happened. And I had a request recently that like sparked my memory, and I was like, oh yeah, I was supposed to film that video. So I'm making it now. Hopefully those of you who need it find it helpful. But the topic of today's video is going to be selecting an adoption agency. This is going to be a little bit about the process of selecting an agency, things you should consider or keep in mind when selecting an agency, and questions that you should absolutely be asking any agency that you're considering working with. I want to preface this video by saying in this video and on this channel really, I mainly focus on domestic infant adoption. And the reason for that is just that it's the one that I have experience with. I know a little bit about the other kinds of adoptions just because I've done some research, but I don't know enough where I feel comfortable talking about the processes of each. I'm also by no means an adoption professional or expert. I'm just somebody who has experienced going through the process as a hopeful adoptive parent and now an adoptive parent. And hindsight is 20/20, right? So there's a lot of things that I know about the process now that I didn't know then that I wish I could have gotten that information from somebody else. And so hopefully you can take this for what it is just kind of me talking about my experiences and the things that I think that you should keep in mind as somebody who's been through the process. You've decided that you want to grow your family through adoption. Great, congratulations. I'm so happy for you. You're probably really excited and also probably entirely overwhelmed because there's just a lot of information out there, and it can be really overwhelming trying to figure out like what is the next step. Like I know I want to do this, but like what do I do now? Like who do I call? So before you even start looking at agencies, the first thing that you need to do is decide what kind of adoption that you want to pursue. And the reason that this is the first step before looking at agencies is because not every agency is licensed to perform every kind of adoption. So knowing what kind of adoption you want to pursue is actually going to narrow down the pool of available agencies to you. And for international adoptions, you're going to want to take things a step further and decide what country or countries you're open to pursuing an adoption from, because not every agency has a program with every country. You might find an agency that has a great program with China, but not India, and maybe India was your first choice or something like that. And so you're really going to have to do your research to figure out, you know, who specializes in what or who has a program in what country. Once you've decided on the kind of adoption that you want to pursue, the next thing I encourage hopeful adoptive parents to do is think about the size of agency that they would like to work with. Do you want to work with a large agency or do you want to work with a smaller agency? And I think sometimes a lot of people don't really consider the size of the agency or the pros and cons of working with both, because there's pros and cons of working with either. I will tell you personally, we chose a smaller agency. I'm just somebody who prefers smaller organizations and entities in general. I was that way when selecting a college. I didn't want to be in a massive lecture hall with 400 students. I wanted to be like one of 30 that kind of knew my professor. And that's really how I felt about adoption agencies too. My husband didn't really have a preference, and you might not either. There might be just kind of pros and cons to each that help you make that decision. But I very strongly knew that I wanted to work with a smaller agency. But there are certainly benefits to working with a large agency. For example, a lot of the times larger agencies are going to be, especially in domestic infant adoption, they're going to be nationally licensed. So if you live in Ohio, you could very well be placed with a child that was born in California. And even if the agency isn't licensed all throughout the US, they might be licensed in 15 or 20 states, which still obviously opens you up to a lot more matches than maybe you would experience if you were just with a small in-state agency. Something else to consider with that is that you are going to have travel expenses when that child is born. You're going to have to go to that state for the birth or to pick up the child. Oftentimes you have to stay there while all of the ICPC paperwork goes through. For those of you who don't know, ICPC stands for the Interstate Compact on the Placement of Children. Basically, like in layman's terms, it's just paperwork that has to happen in order for you to move a child from the state that they were born in to the state that you live in during the process of adoption. There's really no telling how quickly ICPC paperwork is going to go through. I mean, it could take a week if you're lucky. It could take 2. It really depends on where you are and the volume, I guess, that they're dealing with at the time. But while you're waiting for ICPC, if you don't have family in that area that you can like stay with, you're gonna have to probably get a hotel, and not just any hotel, because you're gonna have a baby, so you probably need a kitchen, especially if you're gonna be there like 2 weeks. So you're really looking at more of like an extended stay type property or an Airbnb, and that can add up really fast. So again, if you're trying to adopt on, you know, a little bit more of a fixed budget, it might be a little bit hard to factor in the expenses of having to travel, which you would have to do if you went with a match outside of where you live. But the pros to that is obviously you're exposed to a lot more expectant moms than you would be if you were just in one state. Another con that I find with larger agencies is just that because they're so large, you might feel like you don't have as much transparency as to how they really interact with and deal with expectant mothers and expectant parents. And ethics really, really is important in the adoption community. Adoption, especially domestic infant adoption, has not always been known to be the most ethical practice in years past. And there are a lot of people pushing for that change and that transparency because it's what expectant parents deserve. It's what adoptees deserve. It's what hopeful adoptive parents deserve. Everybody deserves more transparency, and there's been a push for that. Actually, there was just an article in Time magazine. I'm going to try to find it and leave the link down below because it's a difficult read, but I think it's really, really important to educate yourselves on, you know, the history of adoption and how sometimes things still go, even though many agencies will tell you, you know, we are ethical. And I just feel like sometimes with larger agencies, it's a little bit harder to monitor that is true. I personally felt like in working with a smaller agency, I kind of had more insight to see how, you know, expectant parents were spoken to and how they were treated and the services that they were being offered and all of that stuff. And I just felt like I had a little bit more of a window into that when working with a small agency. Things to keep in mind about smaller agencies is that they might only be licensed in one or just a few states. So obviously the pool of expectant parents shrinks down more than it would if you were open on a national level. They might have a waiting list for you to work with them. They might only work with X amount of waiting families at a time, and you might have to wait until, you know, other people have been placed and matched for you to kind of get on their roster. Just things to consider. Like I said, you might not have a preference whether the agency is big or small initially until you kind of do your due diligence and kind of learn what each agency can and can't do. And that might be what helps you make your decision. Once you've narrowed down the kind of adoption and the size of the agency, whether you want something where you're going to be open to more matches or it's going to be a little smaller, maybe more intimate experience, where you're really going to get to know the social workers and the people working on your adoption and working with the expectant parents. Once you kind of decide that, then you search agencies that kind of fit that criteria. And you start, you know, kind of taking your notes and lining up consultations and interviews, as I like to call them, because you absolutely need to come into these consultations with a list full of questions that you need answered by the agency, because those answers are really going to help you make your decision. Consultations can run a few ways. They can be over the phone, they could be like a virtual video meeting, or they could be in person if you live in the state of the agency that you are reaching out to. But I kind of feel like regardless, the flow of all the consultations kind of go the same. It's like, it's kind of like a business meeting. Like, you tell me a little bit about your organization and I tell you a little bit about me, and then you tell me a little bit about the process, and then you open it up for Q&A. Now I want to get into questions that I think are really important for you to ask. The first one is, how do expectant mothers or parents find you and learn about your services? Do you guys advertise? How do you advertise? You know, is it through programs for women or charities? Like, how do these women and expectant parents find you? The reason I think that it's important to ask that is because something about adoption agencies spending money on like real advertising, I don't know, it just like doesn't sit super well with my soul. And I can't really put my finger on why. And I guess the best way to explain why it feels sus to me is to just say that that feels like a business. And I don't want to feel like my adoption agency is a business, because this isn't a business. This isn't, you're not buying or trading a child. This is a service to, you know, unite two families that want to make this decision for this child. And it's a lot more emotional than that. And I just feel like advertising on like a park bench is maybe not appropriate. I'm not saying that I've ever seen an adoption agency do that, but I have seen adoption agencies advertise on, you know, Facebook and like, and I don't mean like your own Facebook where you just put up a post that says like, that's free. It doesn't cost you anything. When I see ads reoccurring because I've searched adoption and now I'm seeing it in Google and I'm seeing it on my Facebook and I'm seeing it on my Instagram, that means that that organization, that agency paid money to be seen everywhere, and that I don't really love. Next, what is the process that expectant mothers or parents are taken through when they reach out to you to learn more about your services? It's really important to me that when expectant parents reach out to learn more, that adoption isn't shoved down their throat as like the best and really only option for them, because to me that's just not ethical, one. And two, I just feel like you're not properly vetting, you know, expectant mothers and parents, and I feel like that's just like a recipe for a disaster. Because of course, even after an adoption plan is created, anything can happen. It could fall apart. You can end up with a failed match, worse, a disrupted placement. That's always a possibility. But I feel like there's a greater likelihood of that happening if you don't give all of the options up front. So when you give all of the options and information up front and allow them to kind of, you know, think it over and make a decision before, you know, coming up with an adoption plan, I feel like you're protecting the expectant parent and you're also protecting the waiting families that you're working with. How accessible are your social workers or counselors to expectant parents? What kind of counseling and frequency of counseling can we expect that they will receive? Again, ethics. You want to make sure that these women and parents that are choosing to go through with adoption are being taken care of. You want to make sure that mentally they're being supported, that they know what they're doing and they feel comfortable with what they're doing. And it's a tough thing. Like, it's never something that I feel like you 100% are like, yep, good. Like, you're always, it's gonna weigh on you in some way. It's not an easy decision at all, ever. And so they need that support. They need people to talk to. They need people that are going to listen, not people that are going to keep guiding them and saying like, this is what you have to do. Yeah, this is, I get that you're feeling that way. That's why this is the best plan for you. Adoption's the best thing for you. You don't want that. You don't want them to feel coached and like they're being forced into it, but you want to know that there are people there to listen to them, to hear them out, and to kind of be a shoulder for them. And so you want to make sure that they're receiving the right counseling and resources throughout the process. This one's also important. How are expectant parents treated if they decide to terminate their adoption plan? Are there continued services and counseling for them after that? Simply put, that child that you're matched with is not your child until their biological parents terminate their rights and the child is then placed with you. So up until that point, it is within a birth mother or birth parent's right at any point in time to terminate her adoption plan, and she or they should be supported in that decision. Trust me, I've been through a failed match and a disrupted placement, and I'm here to tell you, as an adoptive parent or hopeful adoptive parent, both of those situations hurt like heck. Yes, they do. And you cry and you feel bad for yourself and you're sorry. But at the end of the day, I 100% support any woman that wants to parent and raise her own child. It's not about me. It's about what's best for that child. And if that means that child never has to grow up knowing about adoption and what adoption is and that how they fit into that, then that's great. And so yes, it's hard, but you support them because it's what's right. And what wouldn't be right is for an agency to just cast aside a woman that they were just working with just because she has changed her mind. She shouldn't be treated any differently. She should still be supported. Hopefully there are still some kind of resources, or at the very least that the social workers or counselors still reach out periodically just to see, you know, how they're doing, because we're all humans and we all should be treated like humans. Next one is post-placement. How are birth mothers and birth parents treated? What resources are available to them after they've placed their child? Obviously you want to make sure that they're still being taken care of and then their mental health is still being taken care of after they've made this difficult decision to place their child, especially after they've made this difficult decision to place their child. Next, you'll want to know if there's any counseling or similar services available to yourself as a hopeful adoptive parent. Some agencies offer, you know, counseling, or they tell you to call your social worker whenever you need to chat, or whenever you need to talk about how you're feeling in the process. You know, some have support groups where the other hopeful adoptive parents kind of all get together and talk about their feelings on the journey and the process. You may not feel like you need any of those services, but if you are somebody who feels like you might need those services and you might need that support, then it's definitely worth asking about. Next, you should ask the agency if there's any adoption education provided or offered to you, or if there's any like required classes that you have to take. So for us, when we worked with our agency, there were 2 classes that we had to take, and I will say those 2 classes were very helpful and informative. We definitely learned a lot, but I will say a lot of the education that I have on the adoption process has kind of just come from my own desire to educate myself and to read articles and to talk to people and engage with people that I have met in the adoption community online and things like that. This is a big one. Does your agency encourage open adoption? Do you help facilitate open adoption in any way? Do you encourage biological parents and adoptive parents to communicate directly? And lastly, within that group, does your agency hold any kind of annual event that kind of reunites biological parents, adoptive parents, and the children? If you've been following the channel for any amount of time, you probably know that I am a big fan of open adoption, and I think it's really, really important. To be transparent with you, it was something that scared me when I first started the journey. So if you're at the beginning of the journey and you're scared, know that it's really nothing to be scared of. It's actually a really, really incredible thing. And there's also varying degrees of open adoption. It's not a one-size-fits-all thing, and you guys are gonna have to come together and decide what you're most comfortable with. So don't let it scare you. It really is an incredible thing. And more importantly, it's the best thing for the child, so they don't grow up with questions about where they came from, what their biological mom is like, if they have their dad's eyes or not. Like, they'll know because they'll have that information. And also, it's really important for adoptees to grow up having that background of health and kind of health history from their parents, which a lot of the times you don't get in like closed adoptions. I'd be very wary of any agency that is not pro open adoption, or any agency that is not encouraging that. And when I ask, like, you know, do you facilitate it in any way, I mean that if, you know, a biological parent didn't feel comfortable with maybe you having their cell phone number or email address, would it be okay for you to send emails or letters to the agency and they pass them along if they don't want that direct contact? And will the agency continue to do that for you post-placement? So from my own personal experience, the social worker that worked on our adoption journey shuttled back and forth many a times when, you know, we wanted to send a Christmas gift, or Josiah's biological mother wanted to send a Mother's Day gift or something like that. And so having that was incredibly helpful, you know, in the very beginning when we were still kind of, you know, figuring out that relationship. Knowing that both parties are important post-placement to me, and that it wasn't just like a one and done thing, is like very important. Next up, you'll want to kind of get an understanding of how the agency handles birth parent expenses. So you can just ask, how do you handle birth parent expenses? What qualifies as birth parent expenses and what doesn't qualify as birth parent expenses? Next, you'll want to know, what are the agency fees? When are they due? And are any of them refundable under certain circumstances? Let's just say, for example, your agency requires you to pay the post-placement fee, you know, 4 weeks before the expected delivery of the child, but then 2 weeks before the match ends up being failed. You'll want to know that that money is coming back to you, or that they hold that money in some kind of trust for the next match if you continue your journey with them. The reason I think it's important to ask for the fees is because you're gonna want transparency about how much money you're spending. You're gonna kind of want to put together a mental idea of around what this journey is gonna cost you. And of course, there's no way to know for sure, but you're gonna want it like a general idea, and then add maybe a cushion of, you know, a hiccup expense, just in case. But I think it's important for agencies to be transparent about fees. And even further, I think if you want kind of a breakdown as to how that fee is spent, I think that they should be able to provide that as well, because sometimes it can feel a little bit weird when you're handing over a check for just say, let's say $10,000 and it's for a placement fee or something, but you're like, okay, but what does that mean? And they should be able to tell you what that $10,000 breaks down to. It might be 4 counseling sessions for the expectant parent and us to file XYZ paperwork with the court, and for the time it takes for the social worker to write up this report, she has to be paid, and all of this stuff. And they'll be able to break it down for you, and they should be able to if you ask that information. The next thing you're going to want to ask is, how many failed matches and disrupted placements does their agency see? And they might not be able to give you an exact amount or a percentage, but I feel like they should be able to say, you know, we see X amount of failed matches a year typically, and that seems kind of normal for us. And we only see maybe 1 or 2 disrupted placements or something like that. I would be super weary of any agency that says, oh, we don't really ever see, you know, failed matches or disrupted placements, because I just find that really, really hard to believe. Of course, in filming this video, the sky just turned black and literally Armageddon is about to happen. We're about to have some kind of crazy storm. If I would have known that the lighting was going to change this drastically, I would have brought my ring light down, but I didn't. So I apologize for the lighting from here on out. And lastly, and I think this is probably the most commonly asked question, is like, what's the wait period? Like, how long am I going to be awaiting family? And the reason I also think that this is important to ask, I mean, not only does it give you an idea of, you know, how long you can, you know, expect to wait on average, but I think this is very telling of the agency, because if an agency throws out a number that just seems really quick or a really short wait, I think you should be wary of the agency. Any agency that's like, oh yeah, you wait 6 months on average for a match, I feel like is lying, and they might be maybe doing some unsavory things. I personally would rather get an estimate on the higher end and then be pleasantly surprised if it's shorter. When we started our journey, we were told it could take a year to a year and a half to get matched for the first time, and we were matched 3 weeks into our profile being live. However, that match did end in a failed match, and then 3 weeks later we were matched again, and then that ended in a disrupted placement. By the time our son was born, we had been on our adoption journey for a year. The reason it's important to ask a lot of questions, and I encourage to ask a lot of questions, is because how the agency answers is really, really important. You want to get out of their answers is a sense of transparency, clarity. Are they beating around the bush? Or are they being very clear? Do you understand what they're saying? You also want to get a feel for the agency's professionalism. And lastly, and probably something that was the most important to me, was how compassionate do they seem in the answers that they're giving. I can tell you that part of the reason that we picked the agency that we picked was because I felt like the social worker that we spoke with was so compassionate and had so much passion for what she did and protecting the rights of expectant mothers and parents. And that's exactly what I wanted to feel. I wanted to feel good about the decision that we were making, and like whoever we were matched with was going to be taken care of. And I didn't want it to feel like this child was a commodity in any way. And so it was really, really important to me that that compassion be there. Last suggestion I have for you is to ask for references. You should ask for references that are adoptive parents that have been placed with a child through their services, other waiting families that might be willing to talk to you, and if there is a birth parent or 2 that are willing to discuss with you their experience. This will give you honest and unbiased perspective from people that have gone through it or going through it and are kind of on the other side, and allow you to kind of understand how they feel or felt about working with that agency. And I mean, I feel like it probably would be difficult for them to find a birth parent that might want to speak to you about the process, but maybe there's just one that they've worked with that's open and can talk to you about the process. I really feel like it would be beneficial to hear how they felt about their part in the experience and how they felt that they were treated, because the name of the game here is ethics, obviously, and making sure that everybody is being treated human and taken care of. And you want to make sure that what they said they do, they actually do, and that would be a good way to verify it. Those are the things I really think that you should consider and be keeping in mind, and the questions that you should really be asking when sourcing an agency. Ultimately, I want to encourage encourage you guys to just like trust your gut. You know, if it doesn't feel right, it's probably not right. And if it feels good, then you'll know that it feels good. And also guys, keep in mind that you can always change agencies or work with more than one agency. Maybe if you feel like you have been waiting for a long time and you haven't been being presented, you can work with more than one agency, or you can always switch agencies. I hope you guys found this video helpful. If you did, please leave it a thumbs up. You can leave me any questions, comments down below. Don't forget to subscribe for more videos from me in the future, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.